This is the first of a series of videos about switching between fractions, decimals, and percentages. If we have a number in one format, say a fraction, we can rewrite that same number as a decimal or a percent. Similarly, if we start as a decimal, we can switch to a fraction or a percent. And if we start as a percent, we can switch to a fraction or a decimal. What we'll do first is we're going to do what I think is probably the easiest one, switching from a fraction to a decimal. So in doing that, we could start with a fraction such as, let's say, 1/5. So if you think of that as 1 divided by 5, we can just put that right into our calculator, 1 divided by 5, and it will give us the decimal format, 0.2. If I was doing it with a long division, 1 divided by 5, I can always put a decimal point and add more zeros and do my division. And 5 goes into 10 2 times. And that's how I get that 0.2. So let's try another one. Let's say we had 4/11. So I could do that on my calculator, but I want to show you what it would look like if I did it by hand. So 4 divided by 11. You'll notice as I start working through this long division that I get to a point where I'm repeating what I've previously done. And this would just keep on repeating and repeating over and over. Sometimes you'll see that written in decimal form with the numbers that are repeating, in this case 0.36, with a line over the 36 to show that those decimals repeat over and over and over. We are also often asked to round, and in this class that's what we're going to do, to the nearest, and let's say we round to the nearest thousandth. So in this case 4 divided by 11 would be 0.36, and if I'm rounding to the nearest thousandth it would round up to 0.364. And one more example we'll do if we had something like 3/8, and I could divide that either on my calculator or I could divide it by hand. I'm just going to do it by hand to show you what happens. Oops, excuse me, 56. And in this case, again, we get down to something that stops, so 3/8 is exactly equal to 0.375. So we did two examples, 3/8 and 1/5, that gave a decimal that terminated. So these are called terminating decimals, and terminating means when we do the division, the decimal stops at some point. It doesn't keep going. And then the other type we did, 4/11, this is what's called a repeating decimal because something repeats over and over and over. All fractions are either going to be terminating or repeating, and since we're never sure if something has started repeating yet unless we divide it out, we'll be rounding to the nearest thousandth in most cases. So that is going from fraction to a decimal. And we're just going to go ahead and do that on our calculator. 3 divided by 8, 4 divided by 11. You don't have to do this long division. I just wanted to kind of show you that difference between something that repeats and something that terminates. So next we want to look at going from a decimal to a fraction. So when we go from a decimal to a fraction, we'll start out with the decimal. And the steps are this. We're going to read the decimal, and then we're going to write the fraction we read. And finally, we're going to reduce the fraction if it reduces. So for this case, I would read this 15, and think about when we learned our place values, that's tenths, hundredths. So 15 hundredths. And so I'll write that fraction, 15 hundredths. And that does reduce, so it reduces down to 3 over 20. And then I could check that. I could take 3 divided by 20 on a calculator and make sure it gave me back to 0.15. And let's do another one of those. Okay, if I read this decimal, I read that as 8 thousandths. So I'd write 8 over 1,000, and then again I'd reduce that. That reduces down to 1 over 125. And one last example, if I had something like 5.4, I say that 5 and 4/10, the and being the decimal point. And when we write fractions and we say the word and, that tells us we have a mixed number. So this will just be the same as 5 and 4 divided by 10, which reduces to 5 and 2/5. So now we've done examples switching between fractions and decimals.